This is your math gal, Julie Harland. Please visit my website at yourmathgal.com, where all of my videos are organized by topic. In this video, we're going to determine whether the following functions are even, odd, or neither. So here's our function, our first one, f of x equals the sine of 3x. So what we need to do is, first of all, figure out what f of negative x is and see if we get exactly the same thing as that f of x or the opposite, or if neither of those things happens. So that means we're going to put in negative x in place of x. So we have sine of 3 times negative x, right? We're replacing x with negative x. So this gives us in parentheses negative 3x. Now the sine is an odd function, so the sine of negative 3x is the same thing as negative the sine of 3x. So the question is this: is that the same thing as negative f of x? Now if you want to see what negative f of x is, you could always write it down over here. Negative f of x would be negative sine of 3x, right? You just put the minus sign in front of whatever f of x is. And so the question is that the same thing as either just the sine of 3x or negative the sine of 3x? And yes, it's the same thing as negative sine of 3x. So this is actually negative f of x. So what I have is that f of negative x is actually equal to negative f of x, and that makes it an odd function. So this is an odd function. Okay? In other words, f of x is an odd function. All right, here's the next one. And do the same thing. And over on the side, let's just write down what negative f of x would look like. Negative f of x would look like negative 2 sine squared x, okay? So remember, we're trying to find out if we're going to get exactly f of x, which is 2 sine squared x, or negative f of x, which is negative 2 sine squared x, or if neither of those things happens. All right, so we need to compute f of negative x and see what happens. So we're putting in sine squared of negative x. Now this is a little confusing. We have to be careful here. This means the sine of negative x times the sine of negative x, right? And what's the sine of negative x? Well, sine is the odd function, so that's negative sine of x, or negative 1 sine of x. And then this sine of negative x is also negative sine of x. So I have a 2 times a negative 1 times a negative 1. I get 2. And I have sine of x times sine of x is sine squared x. So my final answer, was it exactly the same as the original function f of x? Yes. This was the same as just f of x. So this one is an even function. Okay? That means the original function f of x is an even function. Be careful with this sine squared of negative x. You might be tempted to just put one minus sign out here and say this function is odd. All right, next one. All right, what would f of, let's write down on the side, just what would negative f of x look like? It would just have a minus in front of both of those, right? It'd have a negative 4 and it'd have a negative cotangent of x, because you'd have to distribute your negative sign. So just keep that in mind. All right, so let's figure out what f of negative x is. Well, I'm going to replace x with negative x. So I'm putting in negative x for x. The cotangent is an odd function. So the cotangent of negative x is negative cotangent of x. All right, so this is as far as I could simplify. And is that the same as the original function? No, because the original is 4 plus cotangent of x, and this is 4 minus cotangent of x. And is it the same as negative f of x? Well, I'd have to have a negative sign in front of the 4, right? Not true. By the way, some people write this as negative 4 plus cotangent x. Of course, that's the same thing. I just distributed my negative sign. So it's not either. So this original function is neither even nor odd. Okay? Now, if this would have been cosine of x, let's just see. What would have happened if we had a function 4 plus cosine of x? Guess I don't really need parentheses. When you do f of negative x, you replace the x with negative x, and that gives you 4. And then what's this? Cosine of negative x, that's even, so this is just going to be cosine of x. And so this particular function happens to be even, so just note the difference. All right, and the last one, x cosecant of x. So over on the side, I'm going to write down what negative f of x is. It would have a minus sign in front of that, minus x cosecant x. So we're now going to compute f of negative x and see if we get the same thing or we get the opposite, which is negative f of x. So I'm plugging in negative x where x is. So I'm putting a minus sign in place of this x, a negative x in place of that x, times the cosecant of negative x. Now, cosecant is an odd function. So this becomes, cosine of negative x becomes negative cosecant of x. So I have a negative times a negative, and I've got x cosecant of x. All right, so is that the same as the original function? Yes. So this is an even function. This is your Math Gal, Julie Harland. Please visit my website at yourmathgal.com, where all of my videos are organized by topic.